Our next speaker is Dr. Gabriel Warren. Dr. Gabriel is the MBA Program Director and Assistant Professor of Marketing at Bemidji State University. Prior to transitioning into higher education, Gabriel spent 12 years working in industry in the capacity of sales management, and a plethora of marketing roles. He has presented at several professional and academic conferences, along with publishing a few peer-reviewed journal articles. And we're going to have a conversation today about how to create diverse teams in group work. And this should be an interesting conversation given the times we're living in and the environment of our classroom settings. So without any further ado, Dr. Gabriel, time is all yours.
All right, thanks. I'm excited to be here today and share a little bit about my experiences and some of the things that I've done, just in class. And of course, I've taught, for the past several years traditionally, but as well as online. So some of the things I'll share will be from both settings. So if anyone has questions about, how I do it in an online environment versus a traditional environment, I'll be glad to answer some of those questions. So we'll go ahead and get started. And I like to always start by answering this question, like, how do I define diversity? One thing that, everyone is saying now is, they're using that terminology, diversity and, inclusion and all those things. And it can be difficult sometimes to figure out, like, what about diversity are they referring to? Because diversity is various. So it's very big, it's very dynamic. And someone could be thinking diversity is one thing versus the other. So I'm going to just kind of go through a working definition of what I'm going to be meaning about diversity, talking about it today. So traditionally, when you think about diversity, the formal definition is some being able to categorize individuals in some kind of social category. So gender, race, age, things along those lines. And, that is something that is not always easily identifiable, especially when you get into other things such as like religious preference or sexual orientation or things like that may not necessarily be as openly visible. So for diversity in the context of our presentation today, what I'm talking about specifically is going to be diversity in skill sets and how I'm able to identify student skill sets and try to create group work around those diversity of skill sets, because like in the workforce, it's going to be the thing that help them to be more effective, hopefully in getting work done and tackling the different challenges that they will have to face throughout the course. So keep that definition in mind as we are transitioning through the slides and talking about how to create diversity in group work. So just a quick overview. So creating group work for me, and the way I try to do it when I'm setting up my classes, is I always try to think about it from the real world context and the experiences that students are going to have once they graduate and leave the college setting and enter into the workforce. I just remember my first experience after college, getting into that job and having to interact with individuals who were in various levels of skills and of course other things like culture and age and all those things. And I think one of the ways for me to prepare my students is to try to mimic that environment of what it was like when I went to work and I went through my really short training and then got into having to work with other individuals and work on projects and try to develop and grow as a professional. So for me, the way I do that, or one of the ways that I do that, is by trying to really implement a real world group setting environment. And there's a couple of things that I try to do in order to do that. One is I select the group work or the group team members. So when I first started teaching, I will allow students to, pick their own group members. And, of course, everyone who, when it was in the traditional face-to-face setting, it would be everyone who came in together and they sat at the same table. Or if it was students who maybe a part of an athletic team, and they're really close and they get to know each other and they come to register in the same class. So they'll already be familiar with one another, and they just kind of pick their own groups and they know who's going to do what and all of those types of things. So there's already like an established relationship there. So after a couple of years, I started trying to challenge my students to not do that. So one of the ways that I did it was I decided to start picking the groups. And my rationale behind it and my explanation to the students was, when I left college and I went into the workforce, I didn't get to choose who I was going to be working with. So, I may be working with someone who has been at the company for 30 years. I may be working for someone from another culture or another country. I may be working with someone from another part of the region of the country. So, for me, the explanation to the students was, we have to try to train all of us to think about how we're going to start engaging with people that we are not necessarily comfortable with engaging. So that was my rationale for taking that crutch away from the students, because I normally teach juniors and seniors, predominantly seniors, and in just a few months, those students are going to be entering into the workforce, and I didn't want them to not have the experience of understanding how to build relationships with people that you may not know, or you may be a little less comfortable building those relationships with. So that's what I did. I started doing that, and I've been doing that here for the past several years. And it's been something that has really been beneficial for students. And even in the student feedback that I get at the end of the course, I've been able to see how students have grown through doing group work. Also, having a team contract. So a team contract was, something that I actually was given when I was teaching online, and it's something that I've used in my classes, and it's something that has really been a big help for students, especially given the fact that we are trying to build this real world environment space for them. So having that team contract is something that I'm going to go into really a lot more here in the next coming slides, but this is also one of the handouts that I provided with this presentation. So you should be able to see that in the handout section of this PowerPoint and of this presentation. But the team contract is something that really gives the students an opportunity to be a little bit more accountable in their growth and in their development as team members. And like I said, I'm going to go through that a little bit here more in depth in a little while. But another thing about creating the group work to mimic real world experiences is that doing it this way helps to jumpstart team collaborative efforts. So the reason why I do a team contract is, typically in the beginning, group work normally kind of ramps up, and it takes a little while before students get to work together and start working on projects. Typically, I wait till about the third or the fourth week, if it's a 16-week term, before students start to do group work. And having this team contract, I try to do it earlier in the semester, maybe at the end of week 1 or week 2, so that students will have to immediately start working together and building relationships, so that they can work around, that definitive task of how are we going to interact together? How are we going to communicate together? Who's going to take on certain tasks? So that is something that I also think helps to mimic the real world experience that students will face when they start working a job, because they don't typically have 3 or 4 weeks to start interacting and engaging with their team. Also, I think group work helps to increase team accountability and individual responsibility, because although we're doing group work here, I always have some aspects of it to where students have to individually be responsible for various things. And we'll go into that as well in the team contract, where students have to actually lay out, what individual role that they're going to play in the group work process. And then also, I think group work helps students to be able to develop some critical soft skills that are needed, especially one of them being conflict management and understanding how to deal with various personalities and how to interact with individuals who, like I mentioned before, may be from diverse skill sets and not necessarily the similar in the way that they do work or the way that they take care of tasks as it relates to other things. So So that's just the reason why I created the group works the way that I do it, so that it helps students prepare as they go throughout the semester. Because typically with my group projects, we stay in the same group throughout the entire semester. And the project that they're working on, it typically builds each week as they are doing work. It starts to build, and by the end of the semester, they will present their final overarching idea or product or service or whatever it is that we're working on. So this slide kind of gives you some screenshots of what that team contract looks like. So like I said before, I know this is really small. It's probably hard for you to view. So go ahead and download the team contract handout so that you'll be able to kind of see a little bit more about, what is actually in it. Now, this is just an example of a team contract that, I have used just in some of my classes, but you could actually use something similar or create something on your own that will be more catered to what you would like to do in your classes when you're working with, your group work. But the overarching idea behind the contract is to really give students the power to take ownership in their learning process. So what we normally do in the beginning when we assign this is we give it to students. They have this as one of the graded assignments. Typically, it's not worth a whole lot of points, but it is something that would allow for students to be able to work together, like I said before, and start to engage in some of that communication process. So as you go through the team contract, there are lots of things that students have to do. One, they have to establish team procedures. So I always inform students that you are, as a group, you are responsible for creating the rules of how your team is going to operate. So they don't set the due dates. I typically do the due dates, but how they're going to meet as it relates to if they're going to meet, once a week, if they're going to meet, through Zoom or through Google Meets or through some other form of meeting, if they're going to communicate certain ways, they are responsible for setting up those rules and those procedures that their group is going to operate by. Also, a part of them establishing those procedures is how they're going to manage conflict within their group. So if they're interacting with someone or someone in their group is not being as active or as involved in the overall group work, then as a team, they have to put in this team contract how they're going to handle those situations. Are they going to give them a couple of times, like, the 3-strike rule, and then after that, then they come to me as a professor, and then we engage in figuring out how we're going to make sure that this person is involved in the group. But also in this group contract, they talk about if the group decides later on that they need to remove someone from the group, what does that process look like? And that is all laid out in the team procedures. So I do give them the ability to be able to, after several opportunities of trying to work together, remove someone from the group. And if that person is removed from the group, they have to do the project on their own. So that's something that I implement as a way to, encourage students to continue to work together within their group. But if something happens and the majority of the group has been working with an individual and trying to really engage the individual in coming together and contributing to the overall group work, then if the group as a whole decides on removing this person, then that individual knows, based off of the team contract and the procedures that were created, that they're going to have to take up the remainder of that project on their own. So that's one of the things. Also, the contract helps students to be able to review team expectations. So it goes into some questions about, what is the requirement for responsiveness? Like, how quickly are you responding? Are you responding in 24 hours to your group members? Are you interacting through some type of, WhatsApp or some type of GroupMe app or something to where we can engage more regularly? Are we going to have scheduled phone calls? What are we going to be doing as it relates to the expectations of each member? Then there is also a place for students to talk about, just the cooperation and the quality of who's going to do what. There's places for students to actually list out the different tasks that are going to be covered over the course of the semester. So typically I try to give students the entire project with all of the rubrics and everything laid out over the course of the entire semester so that they can see what they're going to have to do. And then from there, in this team contract, they are to assign individuals within the group with being tasked to do those different things. And that doesn't mean that the entire group doesn't help, but it just means everyone within the group has a opportunity to take the lead on doing a specific task that gives them an opportunity to develop, like I said, some of those soft skills like leadership skills, networking skills, and the ability to engage with others. Because one of the projects that I do for one of my courses is I require students to engage with local business leaders within our local community, and they have to be in contact with that business owner or the executive director or whoever it is. Typically it is either a nonprofit or a small business where they can go in and they can talk with the owner. And typically they are responsible for being in contact with that person every 2 weeks. So having these different tasks assigned will give every student an opportunity to reach out to someone within the community and really build upon what they're going to be doing within that project. And then the final part of the team contract is it does have a place for every student to input their contact information. So one for me, so that I'll be able to have their contact information. And typically I tell them in the contract to put the information that they're going to use the most. So even if they have their school email address, if they're not checking it that often, then I want them to put that email address that they're going to be checking. So Gmail or Yahoo or Hotmail or whatever it is that they're using. And then also a phone number where I can be able to get in touch with them. Because early in the years when I started teaching, I was noticing that students would put their school email address and no phone number. And then throughout the semester when things were going on and group members were having issues with getting in touch with each other, when I tried to reach out to the student through their school email, I wasn't able to get quick responses like I needed to. And that would lend itself to students not being able to get work done as quickly. And then when we did get in touch with them, it was one of those things where they were like, oh, I don't check my school email as often. So this is really important in the team contract, is to get contact information that the students are going to actually be using and that's reachable for them so that they know that they can get in touch with them. So, and then they have to sign it. So at the end, every member of the team has to sign this contract saying that they help to contribute to the creating this contract. They agree with the policies and the procedures and the expectations and the tasks that are being assigned, and they understand everything that goes into building that team contract. So that is a very important piece of making sure that students understand the importance of the group work. Because I always tell students at the beginning of the semester, and a lot of my courses, group work makes up a large percentage of their grade, because in the environment in which I teach, which I teach in sales and marketing predominantly, then they're not really going to work in individual components in those types of careers. So they have to be able to interact with each other and engage with one another and know how to work with people who they may not typically work with all the time. So the importance of the contract kind of helps me when it comes down to building out these different groups, because over the course of the years that I've taught, I've kind of broken it up to 4 different types of individuals that I've recognized that typically operates within a group. And this is just my own assessment of working with students and doing a lot of group work over the years. So the reason why this team contract is really important is because it helps me to be able to engage all types of group members, because typically I try to keep the groups between 4 to 5 members, and I don't want them to get any larger, because at that point sometimes you will have individuals who may not have as much to do. So I basically identified 4 types of individuals who I think work predominantly in groups, and I try to identify these individuals throughout the semester so that I know how to engage with them and engage with their group. But the first individual is the leaders. So typically we all know that there's going to be someone in the group who's probably that person that takes charge and they're the one who tries to establish all the rules on their own, and they try to hand out responsibilities to their other group members. And typically this may be the person that is the first individual to reach out to the professor and say, hey, you know, I want to just get clarity on what are you looking for and the things that you wanting us to do. And they're the one who's trying to engage the most. So it's helpful to have this individual in the group, but having that team contract, or going back to that and referencing that, kind of helps to eliminate some of this, because now, even though this individual is, you know, the leader in the group, and they have a little bit more of that personality, that type A personality, they can't just, you know, go out on their own and try to pass out responsibilities and roles and all those things without engaging with their other group members. So it kind of forces them to, you know, engage in interacting with each other without, you know, allowing their personality to take charge and allowing others to not be able to be as involved in the group work. The second type of individual that I've noticed that every group typically has is they typically have what I call the followers. And these are the individuals who are typically the peacekeepers and the individuals who try to implement everything that everyone is saying. A lot of times this individual may be a little bit overworked because maybe they have some individual ideas of their own and they're trying to do those, but then they're getting information from, say, that leader within the group who's trying to take charge and tell everybody what to do. And these followers try to implement those ideas as well, because their overall goal is to try to make everyone comfortable and try to follow the directions that's being given to them. And sometimes they don't necessarily speak up as much in the group because they're just trying to really make sure that they get the work done and everyone gets a good grade, and they're not really being as much of a outspoken person as that leader is. So this individual is the one who can typically be overworked the most, because they're taking orders and then they're taking things on and they're trying to keep the peace. So they typically just sometimes will say, I'm not going to get involved in any of the conflict or the personality differences. I'm just going to take on the work and we're going to get it done so we can get through the semester. So going back to that team contract, hopefully that team contract helps to eliminate some of the overburden or the stress that the individual who falls into this category may face, because now they can go back to that team contract and refer to who needs to do what and kind of hold each member individually responsible for their part. And then you have that minimalist, and I called it the minimalist, which typically can also be considered like a procrastinator. This is the person who typically may lack initiative. They're just not as self-motivated as maybe some of the other group members. Maybe they're not as understanding of other people in the group, and they may try to do what they can, but they only do the least amount of work that's possible. So this individual, they may not ask for additional responsibilities. They may not ask if someone else needs help. They may do the part that they were assigned, but typically they wait for someone to assign them to do something. And a lot of times, because of that, the work and the quality of their work sometimes may not be as up to speed as some of the other group members. So the minimalist is someone who really has to always be maybe contacted, or someone who's always need to be coached up, or, you know, given some additional roles to help them to make sure they stay engaged with the group. So going back, like I said, to the contract helps to kind of reduce some of these things, because now this individual can't say that they didn't understand or they didn't know what their role was within the group. And then the fourth category of individuals who I typically have seen in group work is what I call like the slackers. And the slackers are those individuals who basically are the ones who really are just not great communicators within the group. And sometimes these are the individuals who miss their deadlines. Sometimes they may say, these are the individuals who may have some excuses like, oh, I didn't receive the group email, or oh, my phone wasn't working, or my battery went dead, I didn't get to see the group chat. And these are the people who typically, when they miss deadlines, it forces other group members to take up the slack that they have missed out on. And because a lot of times group members don't want to get bad grades on behalf of one individual who's not working the same as others, then those individuals, who are the slackers may know that, and they typically don't really focus as much on what they need to do. So the reason why in that team contract I put in there for everyone to sign and for everyone to contribute to what they're going to be doing is because it should minimize and hopefully eliminate the individuals who may be the slackers, who don't want to do a whole lot and who wants to miss those deadlines, because they know that if they, as a group, the majority votes them out, then they have to do the project on their own. And then also at the end of all of my group work projects, every group member has to submit a group member assessment. And basically they have to evaluate each group member individually, including themselves. And that helps them to be able to give me feedback so that I know how everyone has worked within groups together. And then I inform students at the beginning of the semester that if at the end of the semester, when I get the group evaluation back, and if everyone in your group has said that you didn't contribute as much or equally to the group, then that can go back and affect the group grade that you have received. So that if the group is getting an A and everyone says that you haven't been working on things throughout the semester, then that may go back and change the group grade for your individual portion. And then that affects your grade on an individual level. So it's kind of like a two-part accountability there for the group members. And one of the resources that I use as a tool, so I use that team contract, and then I also use as a tool something that I did when I was in my graduate program. And it was one of the courses I took, we had to do this Strengths Finder 2.0. And basically it's an assessment that all of the students had to take. And the overarching idea, if you aren't as familiar with Strengths Finder, is the assessment focuses on helping individuals to be able to focus on understanding your naturally given strengths and skill sets, as opposed to focusing a lot on maybe those areas where you may be a little bit more weak in or need a little bit more development and growth. So the assessment, once you take it, it gives you your top 5 strengths. And then based off of that, it talks about, what you're good at, typically some things that, you can do with your strengths to help you be more effective as it relates to working in teams and in groups and with other people, as opposed to focusing on those things that, maybe you're not as good at something. So instead of focusing all your effort on those weaknesses, find out what those top 5 strengths are. And then in your groups, then you identify with other people who are in your group who may have different strengths that maybe you don't have the strengths in, and that's how you can work together. So this is an assessment, and it is important to know that this is not a personality test. It's an assessment that students take. And I typically give students the ability to use this in their groups. And at the university that I teach at now, we have someone who is actually a strengths coach. Strengths Finder, the assessment is through Gallup, and Gallup basically certifies different individuals throughout trainings, and they go and they get certified to be like a strengths coach. So we have someone in our career services department on campus who is a strengths coach, and she's certified. So she would come in and she would give this assessment to each student as one of the class periods. And then students will be able to know what their strengths are, their top 5 strengths. So when I assign them in groups, then they kind of have somewhat of an understanding of what the individual strengths are of the members in their groups. And then they can focus on understanding how to use some of those. And some of those strengths, they vary. So they give you your top 5, but this assessment, you can go as deep as you want. And there is actually a list of 34 strengths that the students can actually get if they decided to pay for the additional Strength Finder list. So typically you get the top 5, and then the 34 is something extra that you have to pay for. So I think it'll be good to wrap up with just giving a short little video of what the Strengths Finders can do for you as it relates to working in groups in the workforce. And after that, then I'll take some questions. So I think the last slide here should be the Gallup.
So I've been a strengths devotee for a long time, for about 15 years. And one of my favorite quotes, so a personal mantra of mine, is a quote from Howard Thurman. And he said, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do that, because what the world needs is more people who have come alive." And for me, the power of StrengthsFinder within an organization is to tap into those talents and those strengths that when they are applied productively and when they're recognized and when they're called out, they truly make people come alive. And we would call that engagement. I call it being fully alive in your work, not sleepwalking, not just going through your day on autopilot, but feeling engaged and alive because your talents are on display and they're being used to their maximum potential.
Well, what appealed to me about using Clifton Strengths is sometimes when you're rolling out assessments, individuals can be skeptical and not buy into it. But with Strengths, one of the things that really drew me in was that they're all positive. So there's no bad combination, and it's not someone trying to trick the survey or trick the assessment, because whatever you get, that's just what you naturally do well. So there is no right or wrong, better or worse. This is who you are, and we want to know who you are.
Just the revolutionizing concept that you would look at your talents and strengths and develop those, and how much more capability there was to do things great by focusing on your talents and strengths. It immediately resonated with me and became quickly kind of my focus in my development of myself, my staff. Everyone I worked with heard about Strengths and continues to hear about it. I would say that Clifton Strengths provides an affirming language for your talents and strengths. We have lots of language, even for talents and strengths, that is negative, where it calls out the dark side, or what sometimes is referred to as the basement of a talent. I love that StrengthsFinder and the descriptions of the themes gives you a language that describes you at your greatest. And so I would encourage anybody, if you were the person here asking me that, why should I do this? Wouldn't you want to have descriptions of your greatest talents and great affirming words that you can use to explain to others, so that you can then have those explanations and those understandings from that point of view, which you can then go on and use for great performance in your life.
It gives us common language.
All right, so everyone, so that was kind of like a little bit of a snippet of kind of what the StrengthsFinders is about and how it can be used in your group work. So from there, that kind of brings me to the end of the presentation portion, and I wanted to take an opportunity to kind of answer a few questions if anyone had some about the presentation or anything I've shared today.
Yes, so we do have some questions that came in. The first question is about the contract. So is the completed contract evaluated for a grade in the course?
Yes, so I typically give it a grade, and it's normally small. So it's like maybe a 25 or 30 point assignment. And it's typically just to make sure that the students do it. Because if I don't assign, I noticed in the beginning, if I didn't assign that as a grade, then students would take a couple of weeks to get it back to me. So I did go ahead and make it basically kind of like an easy point assignment, your first group project, and it forces you to kind of start working together.
And then right along the lines of that, how do you, in an evaluation of that contract, how do you dock or how do you approach that with the students as far as evaluating the grade for the contract?
Oh, pretty much if they complete it. So if they complete it, if they go through and answer all the questions and they make sure that they establish the policies and talking about like assigning tasks and everything, they get the full credit. So I don't take off or anything unless they leave a portion of it blank.
Gotcha. Cool. A question from Camelia. how do you set up the group if you are in an online environment? You don't see all the students or know everyone in the class. So how do you go about setting that up?
So I just normally use, normally every semester when I get my roster, it's kind of random because I typically just go like, if it's a big class, I may go every 4 students. And then I just keep that same rotation. So every 4 students, I'll pick the 4th student in each group. And I normally keep my groups around 4 or 5. So say if it's a group of 30 students, then that typically gets me somewhere around, maybe 6 or 7 groups, depending on how big the class is. But normally what I do engage in discussions like earlier in the semester. So in an online class, students have to go in and they do discussions and they have to kind of introduce themselves and talk about what they do and who they are. And a lot of times I get a lot of information from that, because if I notice that, say a student says, oh, I am a student athlete and I'm on the baseball team or something like that, and I start to notice in the discussion that there are other students who are like that, then I make sure that I keep those students separate. So it's a little bit of homework on my end by engaging in those discussion boards, but it helps me to be able to identify if these students know each other, especially because in my class, typically, like I mentioned, I'm doing juniors and seniors. And a lot of times when those students who know each other, when they're registering for classes, they all try to register for the same classes. So I know if they're on the hockey team or if they're, a part of some organization where they interacted with one another and stuff. So that's what I typically do. I try to do it by first every 4th student, and then I go back and make sure that they're not a part of the same team or club or something like that.
That's awesome. We had a few people ask about the video that you just shared. If we can get a link, I guess we got the video link right there. Thank you, Kelton. They wanted the link to that video. And then just a reminder, a lot of questions, a lot of people loving the contract, the team contract, talking about it on Twitter. And if you go up to the polls, or sorry, the handouts tab up top, if you missed that in the beginning, we made that handout available. So make sure you click that and download it for your use. Lots of instructors here have already commented on how this is something that's getting implemented right now. So thanks for sharing that. That's what's great about our digital summits is if we can give you at least one thing that you can walk away with each session, that's a huge win. And so just want to thank you, Gabriel, for the time that you've allotted to us today. So
thank you.
Yep. And then you see his Twitter handle down there. If you have questions, feel free to ping him there. And then if you hang around a little bit, Gabriel, I'm sure there might be some follow-up questions and conversation that can be had in the chat. So thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate it.